Welcome to Inner Compass. I'm Shirley Hoogstra. The definition of autism has broadened to a large spectrum of behaviors in recent years, and now it includes people we may encounter daily, at work or at home. So today we're going to be learning more about autism spectrum and what we can do to improve understandings in social situations. Join us on Inner Compass.
From the campus of Calvin College, this is Inner Compass, exploring how people use faith and ethics to guide them through critical issues of today.
My guest today is Laurel Falvo, Executive Director of the Gray Center for Social Learning and Understanding in Zeeland, Michigan, a nonprofit organization dedicated to individuals with autism spectrum disorders and those who work alongside them. Welcome, Laurel.
Thank you.
We've heard about autism and now this idea of autism spectrum. What is that? How does that relate together?
Traditionally, as we think way back to the time when the term autism was first used, back especially in the 40s, we thought of autism as individuals with perhaps a very low IQ, very little interest in other people, a lot of stereotypical behaviors like headbanging or rocking. What we know today is that people are on a spectrum ranging from that low functioning end all the way up to people who may be very similar to others in IQ, either have a normal IQ or very high IQ, but that they still share characteristics even with the lower functioning end in terms of social participation, language and communication, restricted behaviors, and some of the sensory things.
What would happen if I would meet a colleague? Because now it's 1 in 150 who may have a characteristic on this spectrum. What would I run into if my colleague here at Calvin College, because you would have a person with ASD, right? Working in a college, correct?
Those, especially with Asperger's, at the high functioning end of the spectrum, are very likely to be very successful in a work setting, may be very knowledgeable about their field of study. You may notice that they really like to talk about an area of special interest, but that the back and forth of conversation as we know it, the small talk or turn-taking, recognizing social cues, things like you looking at your watch or moving away, indicating that you're in a hurry or you're a little bored by the conversation. They may have difficulty reading signals like that and adjusting their responses.
So the social cue piece is something that we really discount.
Right.
We are involved with it all the time. We are picking up these kinds of cues and actually fitting in or not fitting in so well because of that skill.
And we have a tendency to expect that everybody else has the same information we have and the same knowledge of how to respond, that they're reading our social cues. So when they don't respond the way we expect them to, we view them as rude or insensitive.
We make a negative judgment.
We do.
And for someone with ASD, they're sort of hoping that people will see the positive aspects and not just focus on the negative pieces.
I think that's true of all of us.
Yes.
You know, we want people to see us as someone who's engaging and successful, and we all have our negatives, little quirks or things, and we certainly wouldn't want anyone to focus only on those.
Right. Now, there are some terrific things about a person with an ASD diagnosis. Good memory.
Yes. Now, that's typically for facts and statistics. It may not be your day-to-day working memory, like when to turn in an assignment or where they put their shoes.
Right. So So that could be frustrating, especially for, let's say, an elementary school teacher who is trying to get some patterns going in the class and they have to rely on some of those things, and they might not always remember that.
Right. Yep.
And what about the sense that if you're not getting the social cues, it could be very frustrating for the child, perhaps, who has ASD. What do they do when they get overwhelmed?
Oftentimes we refer to it as a meltdown, where they just can either shut down and withdraw, and sometimes people refer to them as being in their own little world, or you may see full, escalating emotions and responses, perhaps screaming, slamming doors, for a young child throwing themselves on the floor and kicking and screaming.
Well, why don't we watch an interview with a family who has a child with ASD.
Okay.
Hi, I'm David Urban, and this is my dear wife Adrian, and we are the parents of two sons, Daniel and Gabriel. Our older son, Daniel, who's 8 years old, has a form of high-functioning autism. He's been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome and an anxiety disorder, which usually goes along with Asperger's syndrome.
Now this guy was he's from a long time ago on the Boston Bruins. His name is Bobby Orr, and he was a defenseman. Usually adults respond to Asperger's kids better than other kids do because they'll be kind of charmed by them. The adults will be because they know a lot of things and they'll be able to rattle off a lot of facts and that kind of thing. And it's going to be very charming. Oh, ha, 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 isn't that darling? Daniel knows so much about, say, Griffin's hockey, okay? But, you know, if you're another kid, you don't want to hear that. You know, and the kid says, well, I want to do this, and he just wants to do his own thing. So other kids have a harder time with Daniel, especially when he starts screaming, then they just tend to walk away. A lot of times they just walk away in the middle of playing because they'd rather play with other kids who don't have the problem like me. There's this kid in my Sunday school class who seemed really nice, but every time I ask him to play, he says no. And then right after that, I see him playing the exact same game I want to do with another kid. Well, I used to have a great friend to play with. Now it's even hard to play with him.
Okay, why?
Oh, because of my autism, it's so hard. And the kid, well, it's not really hard for me to play with him, but he leaves really early. Oh, they just don't want to be with me because I'm screaming a lot.
There were a couple of teenagers who saw him do it, and one was clearly very annoyed, and the other one kind of more thought he was kind of funny, you know? And afterwards I just kind of said, hey guys, you know, let me explain, he's got this condition. And, you know, some people know what it is, but I found myself saying, well, did you really explain the condition? Do they care? You know, I mean, part of it's hard because you wonder if people even care enough to listen to an explanation.
We've had it across the spectrum where one parent came up to me and almost with tears in her eyes said, oh, I see how I should just not complain at all with the work that I have with my kids because I see what you have to deal with day in and day out. And I walked away from that feeling a huge weight on my heart that, oh, you've basically just told me what a social retard of a child I have. And then the next person who talked to me about my son was commending me on his intensity of enthusiasm and what a blessing it was. And I confided that I had been very disappointed and hurt by a recent comment, and she said, oh no, this is such a gift, you should just embrace it and be so thrilled. We have had... We've lost friends as a result of this. We've had multiple church issues as a result.
We had to leave a church because of it. It was a small church, and you know, they basically said to us, why don't you go somewhere where you can get some help? You know.
There are a lot of people whose children have these issues who are pulling out of church because they're exhausted. They take their child to church, nobody understands the tantrums, nobody understands why the child needs to leave the service, and they end up, it seems to me, from what I've seen, they're going either alone in their houses or they're going to their autism groups, and that's becoming their home or their church. And I think there's a responsibility there. If the church is going to be the church, we need to reach out to people who are struggling with this and let them know they're accepted, even though if their child doesn't look unusual.
I think that one thing that would be a helpful thing other people could do when your kid is going through a difficult time, a meltdown or whatever, is on some level engage. You know, I don't know, just we care about you guys, or I love you.
Not just walk away.
Yeah, not just walk away, because then that's just, all that's doing is reinforcing that, you know, we're the freaks here. You know, we're the freaky family.
If they're around us a lot, parents could ask us in a separate situation, is there any way we could help practically if your child's having a stressful issue at church or in this certain public setting? And any time that they would want to chat with the child, children are often, any child is receptive to other authority figures, sometimes more than mom or dad. They've heard it from us a million times. If they would like to enter in and try to help him walk emotionally through a situation that it's worked before.
I wish they would just be okay with me and maybe I would be better.
It's poignant, isn't it?
It is. And what strikes me is this is their unique story, but it could have been anybody's. I mean, these are the stories that I hear all the time.
So this is representative
It is, very
in
much
so
so.
many ways, right? So the family interactions,
Yes.
that's what I reacted to, that this is not just about one person in the family.
Right.
This is about the family.
Well, and it's about community. You know,
Yes,
they
it's about
talked about
community.
church. He's talking about friendships, whether it's at school or in the neighborhood. Too often, I think people focus on the diagnosis and the person with the diagnosis, but it's so much more about us and how we respond and how flexible we are and how supportive we are and how understanding we are.
So if you were the parents of the friends of this little boy in the clip, what would you say to them? Because clearly this looks like a charming, engaging young boy who would have a lot to offer in terms of play and curiosity, intelligence. But he obviously relayed some heartbreak about people not wanting to be with him the way he does.
I think one of the difficulties of an autism spectrum disorder is that there are no physical characteristics. You know, it's not like an individual with Down syndrome or a physical disability that we can look at and say, okay, I know just by looking at you that my interaction may require some changes on my part. We have a tendency to look at people with autism and say they look just like us, they should act just like us. So a child like him, kids are expecting him to interact the way everybody else does, and I think we don't know what to do with those differences. And so most people respond by pushing it away or saying, I just can't deal with that. So certainly education is important for other parents to be aware of. This child is playing with my child. My child may need additional tools and instruction to know how to handle this child.
So let's say that the playmates are playing. Would you even suggest perhaps that the moms or dads, when they bring them over for a play date, maybe just stay and watch, you know, sort of not in an intrusive way, but observe so that you could maybe ask both children, what worked well with that? What happened during that playtime? Was there anything that made you uncomfortable, or did you want to shift and you found it hard to shift?
Right. And I think, you know, as kids are coming home from school, talking about a classmate who's different, to be asking questions about, why do you think he does that? What information do you think he has? Or, you know, you're really good in that area. If that area was tough for you, how might that affect you in the classroom? To help to develop some empathy.
Right, the skill of empathy is an important human skill.
Right.
And it is important in your work life, in your personal life. So to develop that is something that all people, not just some people, would be well to do. Right. And so this creating this space, is it sort of creating the space so that they can be alone? Or how do we create spaces so that people are together?
That's an interesting question. Certainly we know that all of us need some alone time. And individuals with autism, because they're dealing with often difficulties with the sensory arena, sounds, lights, activity, may need more of that. They also may have a different level of need for social interaction. So some of us think of social as relaxing, to connect with other people, and for them it can be a lot more taxing. So certainly they need that alone time, but we need to equip them with the skills so that they can be socially successful. And that means helping them develop strategies for understanding others and coping with some of their differences. It also means working with the people that they're interacting with to make sure that we kind of set everybody up for success.
You know, there's a judgment piece that comes along with almost every social interaction. And I think that if you've ever been in the grocery store and your child has a meltdown, it's very public, it can be embarrassing, and you just know that the other people are saying, why don't they just control their child, right? Why don't they must be poor parents if their child is acting that way. So if you're in relationship with parents of an ASD child, how can you show a support, a non-judgmental support that says, look, we get it. And on the other hand, how can we interact together so that it's not as taxing as it might be?
Well, like they talked about, you know, treating them like normal parents.
Yeah.
You know, giving them the same kinds of support that we would for anyone. And I think for some people it'd be difficult to say, I get it. So maybe saying, I don't get it. You know, I don't understand. I haven't walked in your shoes, but I want to be here for you. Tell me what you need. Tell me how I can best support you.
For instance, you could say, I noticed that your son had this meltdown. Why does that happen?
Right.
And what is it like for you, and what is it like for your son?
Or other things we can do to help your child perhaps avoid some of those meltdowns, or how should we respond when it happens? So whether it's in a church setting or a neighborhood get-together or a play date with friends, recognizing that parents have a lot of information about this child and can help guide us in meeting the child's needs as well as the family's needs.
You know how when you see something that's embarrassing or out of the ordinary, you don't know whether to acknowledge it and sort of bring it to people's attention. Is that more embarrassing for the person who's kind of dealing with that situation? Or do you sort of just pretend it didn't happen and sort of, save the embarrassment from coming to light, although obviously.
There are some things, they're front and center, they're out there like a child melting down in the grocery store. Parents know that other people are watching and making judgments. So making a comment just like, is there anything I can do to help, is probably better than just turning your eyes, and because social cue-wise, we're sending a message by turning away that we either don't identify with your pain or you're kind of an untouchable right now. So I think there are ways to reach out to people, but recognizing everybody's needs are different, and so parents may take you up on it or not. Some may be offended, but I think if we're acting in good faith to try to reach out to them, that'll help.
And don't you think the authentic comment, which is, how can I be part of this?
Right.
How can I help? When you say that in an authentic, non-judgmental way, people do feel relieved to be part of a community.
Well, and the thing about a social interaction, it takes more than one person. Daniel's issues are not an issue for him. He has this special interest. He has this way of interacting. It's when we put him into a social context with other people, with their expectations and their thoughts about him and their responses to him, that becomes a problem.
So will ASD symptoms like the meltdowns or the inability to read social cues in a refined way, does it get better so that when Daniel is 15 and then 25 and 35, there's actually a developmental learning process to reduce some of the things that cause frustrations for him and others?
The exciting thing that we know about the autism spectrum is that people can move up the spectrum. So a child diagnosed maybe at a little bit lower functioning level at age 3 may have moved up to the Asperger's level by age 14, may be functioning as an adult where most people don't even put that together, where they recognize that there's some sort of a problem. So we know they can move up, which speaks to the value of early intervention, of continuing to work to meet these individuals' needs and to give them the strategies and the skills that they need to be successful.
So sometimes when you find a child in a family with Asperger's, do you often find that there is something within, that their parents may have little traits of it, or grandparents,
Right.
or how does that work?
We know that there's some kind of genetic link, and they haven't yet isolated the source. What they're thinking is that there may be several different types of autism, all linked to different causes, which helps to explain why some strategies work for some and not for others. But certainly there may be some of those identifying characteristics in parents, in extended family members, oftentimes in siblings. There can be more than one child with a diagnosis, either with one with lower functioning autism and one with Asperger's, or one with a diagnosis and one with just kind of some shared characteristics, but not enough to lead to a diagnosis.
So when you find Asperger's children in a mainstream classroom, what kind of support do teachers get today to deal with this pretty broad set of students in one 25-person classroom?
Unfortunately, very little.
Really?
What we know, especially about the higher functioning individuals, they may be undiagnosed or misdiagnosed, or they may have a comorbid diagnosis, so they may have ADHD as well as the Asperger's, or a combination of a couple different things. With budget cuts, a lot of teachers are not getting the opportunity to go to conferences or to get outside training. And so that certainly becomes an issue. Not only do you have a classroom of 26 students who are all very different from each other, but you have one or two that have very unique needs. that certainly understanding Asperger's syndrome or autism would be very helpful in knowing how to respond to them in a way that works for everyone.
In fact, wouldn't it be important early on for a child not to feel odd or different, and therefore their self-esteem would be so low, but for a teacher who could recognize it early as, and I think we heard in our clip, oh, your child is gifted, right? Your child has a particular set of traits that you couldn't actually teach but come naturally because of this ASD, and that the teacher could promote that in an individualized way.
And there certainly are ways to take an area of special interest with a child and maybe develop a unit around that, or take a child who maybe struggles socially but is really good in math and find a way to pair them with another child to be a helper. But I think we all as humans are looking to have our gifts acknowledged and recognized. So as a teacher or a parent or someone working in the community, to say, I'm going to be looking for those gifts and really celebrating those, but then also identifying the challenges and figuring out a way to meet those.
So now you're in the workplace, and let's say that you're a supervisor and you have an employee who, after watching this show, someone says, wow, I think that this is what's going on. What do you do?
My husband and I were actually out of state shopping at Walmart, and we heard someone come over the loudspeaker and page his supervisor and say, if you don't get here, I'm going home. And we looked at each other and we said, there's no doubt but that person probably has Asperger's, and hasn't clued into the fact that the public address system is not the place to do that, and that you're not likely to have a job to come back to tomorrow. And you know, it brought a chuckle because it was so unexpected. It's one of those things that caught us off guard, but it's also very sad to realize that a lot of people are losing jobs or are having difficulty. So for an employer to recognize that when they're dealing with a person who's not interacting the way they would expect, to be aware that there may be something there that isn't intentional, but that they may need additional information about expectations or appropriate responses in the workplace, how to interact with other people, the types of information that we expect other people to just kind of pick up on and be able to do on their own. We may need to be a lot more intentional with people on the autism spectrum.
So could an employer expect that with an explanation like that, which is, you know, the public address system has this kind of impact, we would like you to limit that kind of comment. Will that be remembered, and will it be able to be incorporated by just a suggestion like that?
It may need to be something visual. It may need to be written down or in picture format, referred to occasionally or frequently with some individuals. The level of support needed will vary from individual to individual. The important thing is to recognize that it's supports that go beyond what we expect to have to do in the workplace with the majority of our workers.
So what is the advantage to an employer for hiring and keeping a person with ASD? Why? Why would you do all this extra work? What's the plus?
That's a good question. They tend to be very loyal, very predictable, especially if you can clue them in on when you expect them to arrive and how you expect them to dress and what their requirements are. They can be phenomenal workers. Because some of them have a very specialized interest, if their work is related to that, they can be highly motivated as well.
Okay, so there are pluses, there's some extra additional accommodation. You know, we believe that being a good neighbor, loving your neighbor, is a quality expected of people of faith. This fits to me in that category, which is, I'm not going to just ask you to be like me. I'm going to figure out who you are, who you are in a created way. You come alongside. You don't just say, well, you stay over there because you're extra work.
Well, what you've done for the least of these, you've done for me, is what Christ said. And certainly we know that the Bible calls us to view each other as image bearers. Unfortunately, like they mentioned in the clip, the church often is the place where people feel most ostracized. And I think we have a tendency to look for socially effective responses from other people in our interactions with them, but we translate that to our worship setting, and we're looking for socially effective responses when I believe God calls us to authentic worship and using our own beings and our strengths to connect with Him and with others. And so I think we kind of miss that in the church setting, that we're looking for the wrong thing.
In some ways, you would want church, or whatever your faith, synagogue, mosque to be, is a place of home.
Right.
A place where you can be yourself and you can bring your entire self. You can bring your entire family there. And people will say, what is it about you that will enrich this community?
Right. You mentioned earlier creating space, and I feel passionately about that. I think we have a tendency to create a space for people. And we have the notch out of the pew so that there's room for a wheelchair. We have our hearing aids for people who are hearing impaired. We're not as good at creating space and making room for other people's responses and their way of functioning and the gifts that they bring to our interactions.
It's actually celebrating differences, because we know that differences will enrich our lives. It's not like we're just being nice to you folk. It's that, oh, you will bring richness to my life like I've never understood yet, and I'm open to that.
And if we're open to that, there's a wealth of gifts that we can be blessed with. Unfortunately, we have a tendency to approach differences as something we're uncomfortable with, so we're quicker to shut that off than to view it as an opportunity to learn and to grow.
Well, thank you, Laurel.
Thank you.
My guest today has been Laurel Falvo, Executive Director of the Grace Center for Social Learning and Understanding in Zeeland, Michigan. I'm Shirley Hoogstra. Thank you for watching Inner Compass.